Hey everybody. So today in the shop, or just outside the shop, we have this 1987 Jeep Wrangler, which is a YJ. This vehicle has a manual transmission and an AMC 4.2 liter straight six engine. It is here because the owner of this vehicle says it's having trouble starting and he just doesn't have any confidence in it being reliable. You may recall from many years ago, we did a nutter bypass on this same vehicle. Doesn't get driven very much, so we're going to do some pretty basic stuff. We're going to tune it up, new spark plugs, new wires. We're going to swap out the distributor. But first, let's get to the bottom of the starting issue. I have an idea of what might be going on, but let's dig in a little bit further. All right, so here's a better look under the hood. Again, AMC 4.2 liter straight six. I think it's got like maybe 60 or 70,000 original miles on it, so really not a lot of mileage on this vehicle. What I think is going on, so let me give you a little backstory before I try to reproduce the problem. So every time I've heard this vehicle try to start in recent times, it's crank up to like 20 or 30 seconds sometimes before it actually fires. What I think is going on, there's a mechanical fuel pump on this side of the engine, right down below this line. This line feeds into it, goes into a fuel filter, and then from the fuel filter, it goes into the carburetor right here. This carburetor is fairly new. This was, I think this was replaced right around the time we did the nutter bypass. What I think is going on is fuel is leaving the carburetor, going back to the tank, and that cranking that happens is the fuel pump filling the carburetor back up with fuel. So I think we're going to confirm this by just popping off this that nut right there. We'll crank it and we'll see if we get fuel immediately or if it takes a while. I've got a 1/2 inch flare nut wrench. Loosen that up. Always best to use these when you have them available. So far, no signs of fuel at all. So let me get a little cup that we can put that line into, and we'll crank it a bit and see what we get. A little zip tie here securing things, so we'll just undo that real quick. And can we reliably point this into something? I'm not really fond of this. Let me get a better setup for this. Okay, so I kind of have some 5/16 fuel line on here. I have this Pyrex jug there sitting there. So let's crank it and see what happens. So this one has a battery cut off, so we'll put the battery back on. Give her a crank and we'll see if we get any gas out of there. You guys are gonna know before I will. Three, two, one. I guess we gotta do brake. Nobody's home. Not cranking at all now. Lovely. All right, well, that didn't go anywhere. I couldn't get the thing to crank. So got a battery charger plugged in just to be on the safe side. I think the battery is going to be okay. And it looks like it is not discharged. So we may need to start our troubleshooting on a different issue. So again, I think I mentioned that the owner said it would crank for a long time, but not sure if I mentioned that sometimes there's just a no crank at all situation, which is what we're dealing with right now. Let me show you what I think is going on there. So all the way back down here, there's a starter solenoid like you see on lawn and garden tractors. So that looks pretty old to me. I don't necessarily want to say it's original, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. So I think what we're going to do first is let's see if we can figure out if we're getting 12 volts at that solenoid. The way that normally works is you'll get a 12 volt signal that comes from the ignition. So like these two terminals right here, you'll get battery voltage to those. That will energize an electromagnetic coil inside that'll then jump this wire right here, which goes to the starter, to the battery cable, which is right here. So this is what prevents the starter from getting battery power. So my suspicion is that if we crank this, we will not get 12 volts from here to ground. So Let's give that a quick test. Again, I could be wrong, but just playing with the numbers here. Okay, well that's strange. I have the meter hooked up to battery negative or ground, and I have the positive side of the meter going to the cable that goes to the starter. I may have had this switch in the wrong position before, which may be part of our issue, but notice we're getting 13 volts right now. That shouldn't be. The key is in my hand. The ignition is off. So that is kind of peculiar. Let's go and crank it now and see what happens. Might get a different result now. Or not. That is really strange. Did a little off-camera troubleshooting, and things just kind of weren't making sense. You know, sometimes the solenoid would click, sometimes it wouldn't. I tried doing a continuity test across it, and like it was just weird stuff. And then I went like this, and this isn't tight at all. So this could be the root of a lot of our problems. So I think we're going to go and tighten the positive battery terminal and try to see if this thing cranks now. Imagine that. You need the battery cables to be tight. I never would have guessed. This is why we can't have nice things, folks. So let's get this bad boy on there. You know what? I think let me clean up that terminal and get it fastened down properly. All right, I got the positive battery terminal tight. I got a helper inside the cabin of the vehicle. So Mr. Helper, if you wouldn't mind, can you try to crank the vehicle? Okay, I hear the solenoid. Still no crank though, right? Crank again, please. Dead. Okay, dead. All right, so we still got problems here. All right, Mr. Helper, you can stop, thank you. I ran a quick test on the battery, said the battery was no good, so I got my NoCo Genius hooked up. Now I'm going to ask Mr. Helper to try to crank the vehicle again. Mr. Helper, go for it. Keep going, Mr. Helper. No fuel coming out, see that? Very little. Keep going. Now we got fuel. All right, so we've proven one thing, well, actually a couple things. The person that installed this battery didn't know what they were doing because they failed to tighten the positive terminal. We also determined that the battery is bad and the starter only works when we have a jumper packet installed. But notice there was a delay when we were cranking and fuel getting into here. So that may be responsible for our starting issues. I'm guessing the carburetor is completely void of fuel. Don't know that for a fact. We could pull the carb apart and see what's in there, but I'm pretty sure that the gas is out of there. So next step, I think, is once we get the starter situation worked out, what is the next step? I do have an electric fuel pump for this thing, so we could do a fuel pump conversion. I am curious to see if it actually starts, though, with the fuel that's in the carb. All right, I've got Mr. Helper in the vehicle. I'm going to ask him to try to start the vehicle, so as he normally would. We have no fuel hooked up, so if the vehicle starts, it's just running off the gas in the carb. Go ahead, Mr. Helper. Keep going, Mr. Helper. All right, so I don't think there's any gas in the carb, so you wouldn't hear this vehicle starting. All right, so I got the fuel line hooked back up to the carb. I'm going to ask Mr. Helper to go ahead and start the vehicle, try to start the vehicle again. If it starts now, we know our issue is fueling. Go ahead, Mr. Helper. Pump it. Go ahead. You don't have to, just let it idle. All right, so I think we know what our problem is. We have a lack of fuel issue at the carburetor. So what's happening, after a couple of days, the fuel is draining back from that carburetor and the carb is empty. So it's not going to run. you look carefully in there, you'll see evidence of our coolant leak, right where the thermostat housing bolts into the cylinder head there. You can see coolant spraying around a little bit. We do have a new housing and thermostat and gasket for it. All right, I think that's enough goofing off for right now. Let's shut it down. Let's try to start it again and see what happens. No battery. Yeah.
It's okay. We know why.
Yep, we know what's going on. So I guess the next step, we have to tell the owner he needs to buy a battery. What I think I'll do tomorrow, though, after the engine is cooled off, I'll go ahead and try and start it again and see if it takes as long to start or if it's equally annoying and takes forever to start. Again, I'm pretty sure we have a fueling issue. All right, folks, it's the next day. There have been some developments. I did get a battery for the vehicle. Went out and picked one up a few moments ago. This might be a Joe's Garage exclusive, so let me just open the door. Anybody see anything strange? How about now? How'd that happen? You can't make this up. I mean, you can't get any closer to... Yeah, I'm kind of speechless. I'll see if I can get some security camera footage showing what happened here, but this thing just rolled down the driveway. I was in here this morning working on listing some stuff on OfferUp, some just odds and ends that I had laying around. I heard a crash. I went outside to check it out, and the Jeep had crashed into the garbage can, which has since been moved, just rolled across the street. So yeah, we're going to be dealing with that. I haven't driven a stick in approximately 20 years, so this should be very interesting. Let me get the battery hooked up, and I'll get you guys somewhere where you can see how interesting this is going to be. Boy, am I lucky or what? A stick-driving neighbor just offered to help, so you guys don't get to see me embarrass myself. Let's get the Jeep back in the driveway. Never a dull moment around here. All right, the Jeep is back in position. Like I said, a neighbor showed up. He has experience driving a stick, so he pushed it across, well, tried to start it, it wouldn't start. Same symptom as before. Then we hooked up the jumper pack to the battery, the brand new battery, and then it started right up. So again, I'm still kind of suspect of that solenoid down there. Maybe we have some kind of high resistance connection down there that's just, just needs the extra juice of the battery to get going. So I think that's going to be the first thing that we tackle, is just replacing that solenoid. All right, let's start with getting that starter solenoid out of there. I'm going to get the battery out of here just so we don't cause any unintended problems. I mean, what problem is intended in the end, right? So we got our negative battery terminal isolated, and we'll unhook the positive. If you guys happen to see a 3/8 drive ratchet anywhere, let me know. I seem to have misplaced it when I was hooking up this battery. Probably around here somewhere on some random flat surface, but if you guys see it, just shout. Okay, I got the battery out of the way. And some of you might be saying, you know what, you can just bypass the solenoid and go directly to battery positive, with a jumper cable. Yeah, I could do that. It's awfully close to the frame. I mean, I could probably make it work. I just don't want to risk shorting the battery to ground and bad things happening. So, yeah, that's why I decided to take that approach. But yeah, if you have plenty of room, you could just take a jumper cable, go from battery positive directly to the starter, bypass the solenoid, and it should crank then. Okay, it looks like things are held on here by a couple of 5/16 sheet metal screws. I'll just take those off. Okay, here's one, just putting it in the battery tray right here. We'll find the other one. Of course, it's very difficult to get to. Wiring harness is in the way. I think we're gonna get a wrench for that one. Okay, I got a 5/16 wrench here. Maybe we just bend this thing up. Not easily. I'll work on this off camera. All right, that was a lot of fun. This bolt on this side took a bit to get out because the wires were in the way, but this is the old one. I just bench tested it by putting a multimeter across these two prongs here, and hooked up ground to here and battery positive to here, and it did click. But I think might be able to save this one just by cleaning off some of the corrosion. But you know, it's off already. It looks pretty old, so we're going to change it anyway. All right, I got this one all prepped. I put some dielectric grease, just a small amount on all the threaded fittings just to prevent corrosion. Also cleaned up the mounting screws of the wire wheel. Also cleaned up where it mounts to the body with a small wire brush. So just got the whole area nice and clean. Now if we still have connectivity issues to ground or to whatever, we can always run, you know, I can use a self-tap or shoot a screw in there and just run it to battery negative or to ground directly if we can't get a good ground connection here. So I'm just going to thread this back in. Pretty straightforward. All right, I changed my mind. The screw hole on the left was stripped. The other one just kind of spun in there, so that might be part of what our problem was. So I'm just going to switch both of these over to self-tapping screws, one size bigger than what was there. Let's see if I can do this without dropping anything. Not the most convenient location for this, but okay, and of course I dropped the self-tapper. Let me get one with a magnetic tip. Let's give this a try. There we go. That's tight. Let's get the other one out and swap it over with a self-tapper too. Okay, let's bolt this bad guy on there. Cool. That's secure now. Let's make sure we have a good ground connection now. So I'm going to hook one of these alligator clips to the frame of this solenoid, if I can. And we'll just test resistance to ground. There we go. Let's go to our battery negative cable, which is right down here. Let's see what we have. 0.24 ohms, so that's great. That'll work just fine. Start hooking everything back up to this thing. So we have our starter cable here. And they gave you new hardware in the kit, so we'll use it. I'm going to soak all this with fluid film before we're done, just to prevent any new corrosion that might occur. So we'll put the lock nut on first here, and the washer. I'm sorry, lock nut and then the nut, not the washer, I'm saying. And then we'll tighten this down with our 1/2-inch wrench. Should have grabbed a ratcheting one. Okay, do the same thing on the other side. Now the other side is the battery side, and if you recall or you notice, there's probably a bunch of stuff hooked up to it along with the battery cable, so I'm going to hook that stuff up too. But first I'm just going to clean this battery cable off a tiny bit. There we go, just hit it with the wire wheel, nice and shiny now. I'm going to clean up the other pieces that hook up on the battery side, just a wire brush manually, just to remove any corrosion and just improve that connection as much as we can. Okay, that should do it. Now let's hook everything back together on the battery positive side. All right, I ended up putting a new end on the positive side. It was just a little ratty, so I used one of those, one of those crimp fittings. I got them from Amazon, so Wirefly or Wirefee. That's the crimping tool. Leave links in the description. So really all you do is you strip the wire back, you pick the appropriate size fitting. From here I chose blue. That seemed to fit the wire the best. Crimp it on using the jaws that come with it. They give you different size jaws and for different types of wire. And then you just use a heat gun right here to get the insulation to hug the wire and the connection really well. So pretty easy. Let's hook up battery positive and see what happens. Yeah, let's do that. All right, let's see if it cranks any better. Let's turn the battery back on. I don't see any magic smoke. Nothing's getting hot. So let's see what happens, folks. You saw it first on Joe's Garage. Ugh. That cranked a lot better, wouldn't you say? Cranked it all. All right, so our turnkey and no crank issue appears to be solved. No longer any issues there. What are we going to tackle next? It feels like there's a misfire at idle, but we can't really tackle that because I like to do the whole ignition system at once. Because I think I showed you a new distributor, and the new distributor has different style plug wires, which are not going to work. So we can't reuse these plugs. What else can we do? We can just take a peek under the cap and just see how bad it looks. Maybe that'll help us determine if ignition is likely the cause. So let me pop that distributor cap off. See if we can pop this cap off. Can you guys see? Probably not, right? Is that any better? No, it's not. I apologize. It looks like it's held on with two flat blade screws. Okay, that one's off. Move this connector out of the way. See if we can snag this other one here. See what things look like. Actually doesn't look bad at all. Looks fairly new. Don't see any obvious cracking or anything. And this is all going to come out once we get our plug wires, which are hopefully not far away. Yeah, this distributor is pretty new, or the cap is pretty new. So that is not likely to be our issue at idle. Could still be fueling. Guess we could probably fix our coolant leak, but no, that coolant's kind of hot. I don't want to do that just yet. It's a couple days later. I removed a lot of emissions garbage from the vehicle. I mean, this stuff, before people scream about emissions, I mean, this is already a computer bypassed system. Like I mentioned, it's nutter bypass. So this stuff wasn't even used anyway. So like this thing here, for some reason, this thing was plugged into the transfer case. Not really sure why. Yeah, all this nonsense was obsolete. So the engine bay is a bit cleaner now. Let me show you what it looks like. So I still don't have the air cleaner back on, obviously, but I reran new vacuum line pretty much everywhere. They ran the PVC valve here all the way to the back. There's a vacuum port on the back of the bottom that's not ported. It's manifold vacuum. So I have a 3/8 line coming for the PCV valve down here to this ported vacuum line in the back. That's teed into the evap canister down all the way down there. You guys aren't going to be able to see it, but there's an evap emissions canister down there. You really don't want to eliminate down there under the brake booster. You really don't want to eliminate that because that helps vent the fuel tank, and if you get rid of that, you'll have fuel vapor smells everywhere, and bad things will happen. Anyway, so I have the distributor advance coming up over here, 3/16 line. That's goes into a 1/4 inch line, which goes into this ported vacuum right here, where it's the same place the brake booster goes. Let me zoom in a little bit. Yeah, so like vacuum advance into here. This dangly bit right here is for the EGR. This plugs into the air cleaner, which is why this is not hooked up to anything. What else? Have the CTO valve. It's a 5-way CTO hooked up to this, which I believe is a ported vacuum here. And I have this other line going to the evap canister as well. So I hope this is all right. It's getting really difficult to find information about this vehicle online. A lot of great resources in forums and whatnot, but those forums link to websites that a lot of them went out of service. A lot of, here, take a look at my carburetor. You click the picture to look at the carburetor, and, oh, sorry, the image is gone. The account's been canceled. So there's that kind of a struggle. So I figured I'd film some of this. Again, just to go over again, we have our fuel carburetor vent here, bowl vent down here going to the evap canister. That'll draw fuel vapors off. We have our PCV valve going back here to manifold vacuum teed into a 1/4 inch line that goes to the evap canister. We have our vacuum advance from the distributor running over here to this ported vacuum here. And again, like I said, this thing right here is just for the EGR. There's a little thermal switch of some kind that goes in the air cleaner that senses when the engine's up to temperature, and it'll open this EGR valve down here. So I think that's probably about it for that. Next, I think I want to get the air cleaner back on and maybe just resume with that tune-up, get this thermostat housing changed out over here because it's still leaking coolant out of here. So got to wait for the motor to cool down though. Figured I'd give you a video you got of this thing running. Started right up instantaneously. Sounds good. Idle's a little high. Yeah, so like I said, idle's a little bit high. Might need a little bit of an adjustment. But yeah, let's stop yapping and start getting into the other tune-up components. All right, I got the engine cleaned off a little bit. I decided instead of doing the tune-up, I think let's swap out the distributor. So to do that, let's get the engine #1 cylinder at top dead center. So I just pulled the #1 plug wire out, which is right here. I'm gonna pull the spark plug itself out. These plugs are going to get replaced anyway. And of course I grabbed the wrong size plug socket. Alright, let's try that again. Got this plug loose. I don't know if the plugs have been changed. Well, I guess we'll find out when they were last changed. I know the current owner has never touched this, including an oil change. Doesn't look too horrible. It's got some miles on it. Let's get the distributor cap off. We'll probably take all the wires off at this point as well. Oh, windy outside today. The rest of our wires off. Maybe. Get that out of the way. You can also take the coil off. We're not going to be needing that big blue thing over there, so we'll take the coil and the bracket off. Just going to use a 1/2-inch ratcheting wrench. And the bolt on the other side. Oh, the bolt on the other side is different. Look at that. So you know someone's been here before. Oh, on the other side looks like an Allen key. Well, that was fun. Had a T40 Torx on this side, making it really fun to get to, and I had a 1/2-inch bolt on this side. Gotta love older vehicles, right? Okay, so again, here's our distributor. Pretty straightforward. There should be a bolt that holds it on the bottom. We'll get to that in a moment, but first I want to address something else. So one thing that I wasn't too clear on after looking at this procedure online is that it seems like a lot of people are running a power wire to the distributor. It looks like this yellow wire, you know, if we hook up, I don't have the key in right now, but if we hook up, this used to clip onto the coil just like that. If we do key on, we'll get 12 volts at this terminal, but a lot of people online are saying that this skimpy wire is not enough juice for the HEI unit. So a lot of people run a separate power wire from the other side of the engine bay. So I think we're going to do that. Let me see where I can tap into though. Okay, got the wire all out of the loom as you can see. Found a couple of options. So again, we're looking for power at key on because that's what the HEI distributor needs. Just a simple 12 volt. You don't want to run it to the battery because it can probably drain the battery or might not be good for the module. But just hooking up a test light, I found this junction right here in the harness. And that gives us, that light lights up. You probably can't see, but the light is lit up. Another thing I found is that the yellow wire that goes to the clip that goes to the coil, the thing we looked at before, you know, I think I said before this is hot with key on and the light is on. That's a pretty small gauge wire, as I mentioned before, but it goes to a larger gauge wire. So I'm not sure if we could just use this or if we should tap into this bundle right here, which is admittedly quite a bit larger. Gonna mull on that a little bit. I took apart this connection over here, so where that other yellow wire was hooking up, and this little wire, skinny one, is actually where the power comes in. So unfortunately, I think that's not going to cut it. I think I've since decided to tap into that wire bundle right there. Sorry about the focus, but let me pry that apart, see if we can sneak another wire under there and recrimp it. Okay, it's starting to get late, starting to lose daylight, getting windy, and my camera battery died, so I'm going to catch you guys up on what I did. So I took apart this factory splice, and I inserted a new number 12 wire that you can see kind of coiled up back here. Taped it all back up. Haven't put everything back in the loom, but we'll take care of that. It's not my prettiest work. You know, it's what I ended up doing is I ended up soldering this bundle of wire, then this bundle of wire together, and then wrapping them both with wire and then soldering them all together. I didn't have a torch that was big enough or a soldering iron that was big enough, so I ended up using the MAP gas torch. It's not pretty, but it worked. It's not going anywhere. Let me catch you up on what I did on the distributor side. So looking down here, this is my new number 12 wire that I ran. Soldered those together, got some heat shrink tubing, still have to heat shrink it. These are the two tack signals, the two green wires that were on the other end of the coil terminal. You can kind of see them sticking out right there or so. So those were connected together, and I just soldered them to this green wire here. This plugs into the distributor about there. So I think that's probably the bulk of the wiring that we're going to need to do. It was a bit more challenging than I expected, primarily because I just, again, don't have a soldering iron that's big enough to do this job. Ended up having to resort to the MAP gas torch, which makes the wiring not so pretty. So let me get this all back bundled up, and then we'll move on to pulling the distributor. All right, so next weekend, I turned the crankshaft with a 3/4 inch socket, just a 3/8 ratchet with a 3/4 inch socket, to line up the timing marks on the balancer down there. It's probably gonna be difficult for you to see. Right down there. So there's some timing marks that are cast into, I guess it's the timing cover, and I put a little silver Sharpie on the damper on the crank just for effect, so you can see it. So you can see that lines up with 0. And in addition, if we take our old distributor cap Notice that one of them is marked with a 1 here. This is the number 1 cylinder. And the rotor should line up with that post, or come pretty close to it. And it does. So number 1's right here. Yep. So we're number 1 top dead center. So now we can pull this distributor and get the new one installed. Before we pull the distributor, you just want to clean that area off really well with compressed air, because you don't want anything, it might be sitting on top there just falling into the motor when you pull it out. I'm just going to pull the vacuum advance line off for now. I think it's a 1/2-inch bolt. I'm just going to use a crow's foot wrench. We'll see how that goes. I haven't pulled the distributor in ages. Like, I can't remember the last time I did this. Bolt's a little difficult to see, but it's there. I'm going to try a 1/2-inch wrench. Crow's foot was a little difficult to work with. Yeah, I think this will work. Bolt is like directly down there. All right, she's coming out. You can see the distributor's moving around just fine now. And we can move it out of the way so we can get the bolt a little bit easier. Can you guys see that? Yeah, you can see it. There's our bolt. Distributor should just pull straight up. There she is. All right, took the cap off of the new distributor. First thing is I'm going to put a little assembly lube on this drive gear here. Don't want it to dry start any more than it's going to. Perfect. Now you may find that the oil pump drive slot down in the bottom doesn't line up with the slot on the end of the distributor. If you need to turn it, you can use a long flathead screwdriver to do that. So my oil pump drive is about 90 degrees off, so I'm just going to turn that. Not like that. Real easy to turn. Let's see how this goes. I already got the gasket on the block. That seems a little off. I'm going to adjust it a little bit. Okay, I got the distributor just kind of loosely in there. I got the hold down clamp on, but it's loose. It's not really anchoring anything. The distributor can still freely turn, which is what you want, because we're going to adjust the timing by turning the distributor. Not a lot of room here. I may need to bend this line. This fuel line here actually doesn't really look factory. Yeah, I'll deal with that though. All right, so as far as the position of the rotor, I think we're good, because the cap is indexed. It only goes back on one way. There's a little notch right here that lines up with back here. And note where the rotor is, and this is our number 1 right here. So I think we're going to line up actually pretty nicely. Or do we? No, we're off. All right, let's get our wiring hooked back up again. We can hook up our new cable for the distributor that we just wired. There we go. So that should be good. Let's change the plugs while we're at it, since we got everything apart. There's just barely enough room to clear that distributor with a wrench to get the plugs out. I got all 6 plugs out, and for the most part they all look the same, which is a good thing. Some cylinders look a little bit richer than others, but you know, it's a carbed engine, it's not fuel injected. Alright, got 6 new champions. I'm going to coat the threads with some anti-seize. Doesn't take a lot. That should do it. I'll just put all these back in. And we'll click each one into 20 foot-pounds or thereabouts. You know, it's steel and cast iron, and you're not going to mess anything up unless you really overdo it. Yeah, these plug wires are a bit long. I ended up getting a universal set for, I think, a small block V8, and yeah, they're a bit long. I'll see if I can do something about that. I might be able to trim these down later. But yeah, just food for thought. The reason why I didn't just get plugged wires that fit is because this is an HEI cap. And there isn't a huge selection of HEI style plug wires that fit this engine. I believe the company that sold me this distributor makes a set of wires for this application, but the reviews online were terrible. Everybody said, oh, they pulled apart, they were no good, this, that, so I avoided those and ended up going with the wrong set, but a higher quality wrong set. So hopefully they work out. Okay, I got the engine all timed in. I just used my timing light, attached the the pickup on the #1 spark plug wire, and just shot the light down towards the crank damper down there. It's a little difficult to see, that's why I didn't film it, but it's pretty straightforward. There's lots of guides that show you how to do that online if you get stuck. So moved ahead a little bit. I got the new fuel filter installed. I replaced all the fuel line here. I did install a fuel line check valve right here. This little black thing with the arrow pointing towards the carb. Get those on Amazon. I think they're like maybe 10 bucks for a 2-pack. They're not expensive. I don't know if they're going to last. We'll see. But I figured that was a pretty low cost, less extreme method of solving the long cranking issue before we switch to an electric fuel pump. So gave that a shot. We'll give that a shot for a while and see how it goes. Now on to something more interesting. So that coolant leak that we had, I think I mentioned that I bought a new thermostat housing. I ended up buying a second new one because the first one was cracked right in there. And the second one that I ordered, different brand, although probably the exact same part, was also cracked. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of that. That's kind of strange. The first one was made by Dorman. The second one was made by Motorrad. And they both appear to be junk. So that said, I am trying to repair the OEM one that came with the vehicle. And the reason why we had a coolant leak was there was some pitting on the actual pipe that the hose connected to. This is the new part, but there's pitting on the old part, like all along here. So I'm trying to fill that in with epoxy now. You know, it's an older vehicle. Sometimes you can't get parts, so you have to make do with what you got. So I'm gonna let that epoxy cure, then we'll get that installed, and hopefully that'll resolve our coolant leak. And this is the epoxy I'm using. I've used this stuff a bunch of times and had very good luck with it. Not designed for automotive use, but we'll see how it goes. Again, sometimes you just gotta make do with what you got. All right, so next weekend, this epoxy is obviously cured by now. Still a little sticky, but it seemed to fill in the pitted metal pretty nicely. So I'm going to reuse this just as is. I'm going to put a little bit of RTV sealant on this gasket here and hope for the best. I think that did it. I started it up a moment ago after I reinstalled the thermostat housing and it didn't leak. Here's proof. You know, in a perfect world, I would have liked to have replaced the whole housing, but, you know, older vehicles, sometimes you just got to deal with what you got, right? You don't always have the luxury of getting new parts. And then when you can get new parts, sometimes they're crappy quality. But our leak has been solved. So I think now all we have to do is change the oil and button this thing back up and get it back to its owner. Okay, I got the old oil drained, I got the old Fram filter off, a new Wix filter in its place. Did the owner a favor and wrote the mileage and the date that the oil was put in, just as a courtesy. So now it's time to fill this thing with your favorite brand or color of a 10W30. So I'm just going to use, looks like Pennzoil Platinum. It was on sale, so we'll use this stuff. I think it takes 5 or 6 quarts, but we'll rely on the dipstick for that. Glug, 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 glug. All right, I get the oil level up to the full mark on the dipstick, so I got everything buttoned back up. Got the drain plug reinstalled. Let's start it up and let some oil circulate to see how much we need to add. Oh, I guess I need to turn the kill switch on, right? There we go. Power on. Here goes nothing. Got oil pressure. Good solid 60 pounds of pressure. It's nice. Let's shut her off and we'll see what the oil level's at. Probably need to add a little bit. Let's see. Actually, it's looking pretty good. It will be a little high because we're on a slope. Let's see again. Just to double check. Yeah, actually we're about halfway through. So we'll add a little bit more. Added a glug, let's check it again. Beautiful. I think this is the last thing we have to do, just install the air cleaner. I did have to reroute this PCV line to clear the air cleaner. I didn't realize that when we set it up, so no big deal. So now we gotta do this. This thing's kind of a pain in the neck. And that goes on that side over there. Finding the hole's always fun. Last but not least, don't forget to hook up the other end of the vacuum hose to the back here. And we also have our vacuum lines for the EGR. And there's a wiring harness back there too. I'm not sure if that wiring harness is still needed anymore, but we'll hook it up. We're already here. So got the EGR. And I think it's this one right here. There we go. Let's make sure she still starts and runs okay. See no reason why it wouldn't, but you never know. Neutral, fire. Purring like a kitten. All right, everybody, I think that's a wrap. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Again, we just did a basic tune-up in a YJ. We installed a new distributor, got it timed, got it oil changed, everything. So if you found this video helpful, please subscribe, stay safe. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.